The mountain remembers everything, every prayer whispered in desperation, every scream of dying men, every promise broken under pressure. Copper Ridge stands like a monument to human failure, its slopes scarred with abandoned mine shafts that tunnel deep into darkness. And somewhere in that labyrinth of stone and shadow, three souls still cry out for justice. Jeremiah Kane knows this because he put them there. The forge glows red in the dim cabin, casting dancing shadows across weathered hands that once built dreams and destroyed them just as easily. 9 years have passed since the Copper Ridge mine collapsed. 9 years since the mountain claimed his family. 9 years since Iron Jaw Kane became a ghost haunting his own life. The hammer in his grip weighs nothing compared to the burden in his chest. Outside, winter wind howls through pine branches heavy with snow. Inside, memories burn hotter than any fire he could stoke. Elizabeth's laugh echoing through empty rooms. Thomas asking why the support beams looked weak. Samuel, barely 8 years old, trusting his father's judgment without question. The hammer strikes heated metal with precise, violent force. Each blow echoes like thunder, like the crack of splintering timber, like the moment when everything he loved disappeared into darkness and dust. Jeremiah stops mid-swing. His breath comes hard and fast, misting in the cold air that seeps through gaps in the cabin walls. The iron on his anvil glows cherry red, shapeless, waiting for direction. Just like he had been that morning in 1869 when the mine inspector warned him about the new shaft. "Timber's green, Kane. You send men down there, somebody's gonna die." But the company needed copper. The investors demanded results. And Jeremiah Kane, chief engineer with a reputation for getting things done, made a choice that would haunt him until his last breath. He told them it was safe. The metal cools on the anvil as Jeremiah stares into the forge's heart. Somewhere in those flames, he sees Elizabeth's face the morning she kissed him goodbye. He sees Thomas, 17, and eager to prove himself worthy of the Kane name. He sees little Samuel, who insisted on coming to work with Papa just this once. The mine took them all. Not quickly, not cleanly. The collapse trapped 14 men in a pocket of space barely large enough for 6. They had air for maybe 2 hours. Jeremiah spent 3 days digging through rubble with his bare hands until his fingernails split and bled, calling their names until his voice gave out completely. When they finally pulled the bodies free, Samuel was clutching Elizabeth's hand. Thomas had positioned himself between them and the falling rocks. They died protecting each other while their husband and father sat safe in his engineering office, reviewing profit margins. The cabin door rattles in its frame as wind drives snow against the walls. Jeremiah sets down his hammer and walks to the frost-covered window. Beyond the glass, the world disappears into white void. Perfect weather for a man who prefers isolation to human company, silence to conversation, guilt to forgiveness. But tonight feels different. Tonight, the mountain whispers of changes coming on the wind. 20 miles below, in the gambling den and saloon that Red Rock calls civilization, another soul struggles with chains forged by other people's greed. Sister Catherine O'Malley kneels on split floorboards that reek of spilled whiskey and broken dreams. Her knees ache from hours of scrubbing, her back screams from bending over wash buckets, but her spirit burns with defiance that no amount of humiliation can extinguish. The rough wooden floor cuts through her thin skirt, drawing blood from skin already raw and bruised. Above her, drunken voices rise and fall like a tide of cruelty. Men who have never known hardship beyond an empty bottle laugh at the sight of a fallen nun reduced to common labor. They call her names that would make devils blush, suggest services she could perform to earn better treatment, place bets on how long before she breaks completely. Catherine keeps scrubbing. "Move faster, you hypocrite." Vulture Morrison's boot catches her ribs with practiced precision, just hard enough to steal breath without leaving marks that might reduce her value. "These floors won't clean themselves while you daydream about your precious Jesus." She gasps, doubling over the bucket of dirty water. Laughter erupts from every corner of the saloon. A man with gold teeth yanks her hair, forcing her face upward so the crowd can see tears she refuses to shed. "Look at that," he jeers, "red as hellfire and twice as stubborn. Who'd pay good money for something the church already threw away?" Catherine's throat tightens, but her voice stays steady. "I am not for sale." More laughter. Morrison crouches beside her, his breath reeking of rot-gut whiskey and something darker. Everything's for sale, sister. Your precious Bishop Cordovan taught me that when he sold you to cover his gambling debts. The words hit harder than any boot. Bishop Cordovan, who smiled while signing papers that condemned 12 orphan children to lives of misery. Bishop Cordovan, who destroyed Catherine's reputation rather than admit his own corruption. Bishop Cordovan, who painted her as a thief rather than acknowledge her as a witness to his crimes. She had tried to save those children. Now she cannot even save herself. The saloon's piano clangs out a tune that might have been beautiful before too many fights and not enough maintenance broke half the keys. Tobacco smoke hangs thick enough to cut, mixing with unwashed bodies and spilled alcohol to create an atmosphere that would choke angels. Through it all, Catherine continues her work because stopping means facing the alternative Morrison has outlined in graphic detail. Prayer sustains her, not the formal Latin she learned in the convent, but desperate bargains whispered to a God who seems to have stopped listening. Please send help. Please send hope. Please send anything but another night in this place. The saloon door explodes inward. Wind howls through the opening, scattering cards from poker tables and sending hats flying like startled birds. Snow swirls into the warm room, melting instantly on heated floorboards. And through that portal of winter's fury steps a figure that makes every conversation stop mid-sentence. Jeremiah Kane fills the doorway like judgment itself. 6 feet and 3 inches of mountain-hardened muscle wrapped in bear hide and wolf skin. His beard, black as iron, fresh from the forge, frames a face carved by weather and worn by guilt into something barely human. Eyes the color of storm clouds sweep the room with casual menace, cataloging threats and weaknesses in a single glance. He does not speak. He does not need to. Every man in Morrison's saloon knows the stories. Iron Jaw Kane, who killed 6 claim jumpers with his bare hands when they tried to steal his copper strike. Iron Jaw Kane, who walked into a grizzly's den to retrieve a miner's body and emerged wearing the bear's pelt. Iron Jaw Kane, who disappeared into the mountains after the mine collapse and emerged as something more legend than man. The silence stretches like a held breath. Even the broken piano stops its discordant music. Catherine looks up from her scrub bucket and sees Deliverance wearing the face of damnation. This stranger's eyes find hers across the smoky room, and something passes between them. Recognition, perhaps, or memory of other women, other times when strength should have protected innocence, but failed in the moment of greatest need. Jeremiah steps fully inside and closes the door with deliberate care. Snow melts from his shoulders, pooling on floorboards that moments before rang with cruel laughter. His massive hands hang loose at his sides, close to the pistol and knife he wears like extensions of his own body. Evening, gentlemen. His voice carries the rasp of a man who speaks more to mountains than to men. I'm looking to make a purchase. Morrison recovers first, greed overcoming fear with practiced ease. Well now, Mr. Kane, didn't expect to see you down from your mountain. What brings Iron Jaw to our humble establishment? Jeremiah's gaze never wavers from Catherine. She remains frozen on her knees, scrub brush dripping forgotten in her hand, afraid to hope and terrified not to. Something in his expression reminds her of statues she once prayed before, marble saints with eyes that had seen too much suffering and remembered every detail. Her. He nods toward Catherine with the same casual motion another man might use to indicate a horse or tool. What's your price? The question hangs in the smoky air like incense. Morrison's eyes narrow, calculating odds and angles with the speed of long practice. Around them, the saloon's patrons lean forward in their chairs, sensing drama brewing with the certainty of men who live for others' misfortune. The nun, someone snorts from the back of the room. She ain't worth a plugged nickel, Kane. Church already threw her out for stealing. Jeremiah's head turns toward the voice with mechanical precision. The speaker, a reed-thin man with nervous eyes, suddenly finds his beer incredibly interesting. In the following silence, Catherine can hear her own heartbeat echoing like thunder. I asked Morrison for a price, Jeremiah says quietly. Not your opinion. Morrison licks his lips like a snake tasting prey. Well now, that's a complicated situation. See, the good sister here is working off debts incurred by her former employer. Bishop's gambling habits got a bit out of hand, and I had to accept alternative payment arrangements. How much? $200. Morrison's grin reveals teeth like broken fence posts. She's been cleaning floors for 6 months now, barely made a dent in what's owed. Catherine's breath catches. $200 represents a fortune to men like these. More money than most miners see in 2 years of backbreaking labor. Enough to buy land, livestock, a future worth living. Surely no stranger would pay such a sum for damaged goods like herself. But Jeremiah Kane reaches inside his coat without hesitation. The leather pouch he produces hits Morrison's bar with the solid thunk of serious weight. Gold coins spill across stained wood like fallen stars, each one catching lantern light and throwing it back magnified. The saloon falls silent, except for the soft clink of metal against metal, as Morrison counts his windfall with shaking fingers. "That's $400, Jeremiah says when the counting stops. "Twice what you asked. She comes with me now, tonight, and you forget she ever existed." Morrison's hand hovers over the gold like a man reaching for salvation. "Mighty generous of you, Kane. Might I ask what you plan to do with damaged merchandise?" The temperature in the room drops 10 degrees despite the blazing fireplace. Jeremiah's eyes fix on Morrison with the intensity of heated metal about to be shaped by hammer blows. "You might ask, but I might not answer politely." Morrison scoops the gold into a canvas bag with movements that suggest long familiarity with quick transactions. "Pleasure doing business. Sister Catherine, you belong to Mr. Kane now." Belong, the word echoes in Catherine's mind like a death sentence. From the property of the church to the property of a stranger, passed between men like livestock or furniture. But when she looks into Jeremiah's storm-colored eyes, she sees something that might be respect hiding beneath layers of carefully controlled anger. He approaches slowly, hands visible, and movements telegraphed like a man gentling a spooked horse. When he reaches her side, he extends one massive hand palm up. An invitation, not a command. "Sister," he says quietly, "time to go." Catherine stares at the offered hand. Scars crisscross the palm and fingers, evidence of years spent working with fire and metal and things that bite back when handled carelessly. But the hand itself remains steady, patient, waiting for her decision. Around them, the saloon holds its collective breath. Morrison clutches his bag of gold, already calculating how to invest his windfall. The drunk men lean forward in anticipation of violence or drama or both. The broken piano sits silent as a tombstone. Catherine places her hand in Jeremiah's. His fingers close around hers with surprising gentleness, calloused skin warm against her chapped flesh. He helps her to her feet with the same care he might show a wounded animal, supporting her weight when trembling legs threaten to buckle. "Thank you," she whispers, the words barely audible above the saloon's ambient noise. Jeremiah nods once, a sharp downward jerk of his bearded chin. "Don't thank me yet, sister. You don't know where we're going." He guides her toward the door with one hand resting lightly on her elbow. The crowd parts before them like water before a ship's prow, men stepping aside rather than risk contact with the mountain man's displeasure. Catherine keeps her eyes fixed on the floor, afraid to meet anyone's gaze, afraid to hope this rescue might be real. At the threshold, Jeremiah pauses to pull a heavy coat from his pack. He drapes it around Catherine's shoulders without ceremony, the garment swallowing her small frame like a bear-hide tent. The coat smells of wood smoke and pine needles and something fundamentally masculine that makes her feel simultaneously protected and vulnerable. "Storm's getting worse," he says, more to himself than to her. "Road up the mountain won't be easy." Behind them, Morrison calls out one final insult. "Enjoy your purchase, Kane, but don't come crying when you discover what the church already learned." Jeremiah stops walking. His free hand drifts toward the knife on his belt with unconscious ease. For a moment, Catherine thinks he might turn around and settle accounts with Morrison in the traditional frontier manner. Instead, he speaks without looking back. "Morrison, you got your gold. I suggest you keep your mouth shut about how you earned it." They step out into the storm together. The wind hits like a physical blow, driving snow horizontally across the narrow street. Lantern light from the saloon windows barely penetrates the swirling white wall that surrounds them. Catherine pulls the borrowed coat tighter around her body and marvels at how quickly warmth can disappear when winter claims the night. Jeremiah's horse stands tethered to the hitching post like a statue carved from shadow. The animal, a massive black gelding with intelligent eyes and scars on his flanks, raises his head as they approach, but shows no fear of the storm. His breath steams in the frigid air, and ice crystals form on his muzzle where warm air meets cold atmosphere. His name's Thunder, Jeremiah says, running one hand along the horse's neck with obvious affection. He'll get us home safe, no matter how bad it gets. Home. The word strikes Catherine like revelation. She has not had a true home since leaving her family's farm to join the convent 15 years ago. Sacred Heart Convent had been sanctuary, not home. Morrison's saloon was prison, not home. But this stranger speaks of home as if such things still exist in a world gone mad with greed and corruption. Jeremiah helps her into the saddle with the same gentle efficiency he displayed inside. His hands span her waist completely when he lifts her, and for a moment she experiences the strange sensation of being truly safe for the first time in months. The horse stands rock steady despite wind that would spook lesser animals. Thunder begins the climb immediately, following a trail invisible in the storm but apparently familiar to his hooves. Behind them, the lights of Red Rock disappear like stars being swallowed by clouds. Ahead lies darkness, punctuated only by the occasional lightning flash that illuminates peaks and valleys carved by geological time into something approaching divine architecture. Catherine clings to the saddle horn and tries not to think about the drop that must exist somewhere to her right. The trail winds upward through stands of pine that provide some shelter from the wind, but snow still finds ways to penetrate every gap in her borrowed coat. Jeremiah rides behind her, his body providing a windbreak and his presence offering reassurance that someone knows where they are going. For the first hour, neither speaks. The storm demands full attention from both horse and riders as they navigate switchbacks and narrow passages between towering rocks. Catherine's teeth chatter despite the coat's warmth, and her fingers grow numb where they grip leather reins. But slowly, gradually, curiosity overcomes discomfort. "Why?" she calls back over the wind's howl. "Why did you pay for me?" Jeremiah's response comes after a long pause, as if he must consider each word carefully. "Because you were drowning." "You saved me?" Another pause, longer this time, longer. When he speaks, his voice carries notes of something that might be regret. "Don't mistake this for salvation, sister. I don't traffic in miracles anymore." The words sting more than wind-driven snow. Catherine turns in the saddle to study her rescuer's face, but darkness and weather make details impossible to discern. She sees only the outline of broad shoulders and the gleam of eyes that reflect starlight like still water. Then why? "Because I needed someone." The blunt honesty hits harder than any insult Morrison ever hurled at her. Catherine turns forward again and concentrates on not falling from the saddle as Thunder picks his way up increasingly treacherous terrain. Behind her, Jeremiah maintains his position like a guardian angel carved from stone and leather. But angels, Catherine knows from long study, sometimes fall. The cabin appears without warning, materializing from the storm like a vision conjured by desperate prayer. Built from local timber and chinked with mountain clay, it crouches against the wind like a living thing that has learned to bend rather than break. Golden light spills from windows that promise warmth and shelter and the possibility of rest. Jeremiah dismounts first, then helps Catherine down with the same careful attention he has shown throughout their journey. Her legs buckle when they take her full weight, muscles cramp from cold and unaccustomed riding. He steadies her with one hand while leading Thunder toward what must be a stable built into the cabin's lee side. "Go inside," he instructs, pressing a brass key into her palm. "I'll tend to Thunder and be along shortly." Catherine approaches the door on unsteady legs, key clutched in fingers too numb to feel its weight. Behind her, she hears Jeremiah talking quietly to his horse, his voice carrying notes of affection reserved for trusted companions. The key turns smoothly in a lock that shows signs of careful maintenance. The door opens into warmth that hits her like a physical embrace. The cabin's interior speaks of a man who values function over decoration, but takes pride in craftsmanship. Hand-hewn beams support a roof designed to shed snow rather than collapse under its weight. A stone fireplace dominates one wall, flames dancing on split logs that fill the space with the scent of burning pine. Furniture built from local wood shows the marks of careful joinery and long use, but it is the details that catch Catherine's attention. 3 plates set on a shelf instead of 2. A child's wooden horse sitting forgotten on the mantelpiece. A woman's shawl hanging from a peg near the door, as if its owner might return any moment to claim it. This is not the home of a hermit. This is the home of a family, carefully preserved like a shrine to the dead. Catherine moves deeper into the cabin's warmth, drawn by the promise of heat and the mystery of her host. Near the fireplace, she discovers a workbench covered with the tools of a blacksmith's trade. Hammers of various weights, tongs designed for gripping hot metal, files for smoothing rough edges. All show signs of recent use despite the dust that covers other surfaces. On the wall above the workbench hangs a framed photograph that stops her breath completely. A woman with kind eyes and prematurely gray hair smiles from the glass, her arms wrapped around 2 boys who share their mother's gentle expression. The older boy, perhaps 17, wears the serious demeanor of someone eager to prove his worth as a man. The younger, barely 8, grins with the unself-conscious joy of childhood still intact. Family. The word echoes in Catherine's mind as she studies faces that will never age, never change, never disappoint the man who loved them. She understands now why Jeremiah Cain became Ironjaw, why he fled civilization for the mountains, why he speaks of needing someone rather than saving someone. The dead leave holes that cannot be filled, only carefully tended like gardens that will never bloom again. The cabin door opens with a gust of wind and snow. Jeremiah enters, stamping his boots and shaking ice from his coat with practiced efficiency. He hangs his hat and coat on pegs that seem designed for the purpose, then turns to study his guest with eyes that miss nothing. "Warm enough?" he asks, noting how she stands close to the fireplace. "Yes." Catherine hesitates, then gestures toward the photograph. "Your family?" Jeremiah's face closes like a door slamming shut. "Was." The single word carries weight enough to crush mountains. Catherine recognizes the tone from her own experience with loss, that careful modulation that keeps grief from spilling over into madness or rage. She knows better than to ask for details, knows the story will emerge in its own time or not at all. "I'll make coffee," Jeremiah says, turning toward what must be a kitchen area. "Then we need to talk." Catherine watches him move around the cabin with economical grace, building up the fire, filling a coffee pot from a bucket of water, measuring grounds with the precision of long habit. His movements speak of a man comfortable in his solitude, but not entirely at peace with it. When the coffee begins to percolate, he gestures towards a chair near the fireplace. "Sit." The command carries no harshness, but Catherine obeys anyway. The chair, built from pine and cushioned with what might be bear hide, embraces her like a long-awaited friend. For the first time in months, she feels truly safe, truly warm, truly human. Jeremiah pours coffee into 2 tin cups, then settles into the chair opposite hers. The firelight plays across his weathered features, revealing details the storm had hidden. Scars mark his hands and forearms, the inevitable result of working with heated metal and sharp tools. Lines around his eyes speak of years squinting into bright sunshine or forged glare. But it is the careful way he holds himself that tells Catherine the most about the man who paid for her freedom. This is someone who has learned to live with pain as a constant companion. "Now," Jeremiah says, his voice quiet but carrying absolute authority, "I'll be honest with you about why you're here." Catherine wraps her hands around the tin cup, savoring warmth that seeps through metal into cold fingers. "I'm listening." "I didn't bring you here to be my wife or my sweetheart." The words come out flat, mechanical, as if he has rehearsed them many times. "I don't love. I don't court. I stopped believing in such things a long time ago." The coffee tastes bitter, but Catherine drinks it anyway. Outside, wind continues to howl around the cabin's corners, seeking entry and finding none. Inside, the fire crackles with comfortable domesticity that makes Jeremiah's words seem even harsher by contrast. "I bought you," he continues, meeting her gaze directly, "because I need someone, a presence, warmth, a woman's company." He pauses, jaw tightening, as if the admission costs him something precious. That's the truth of it. Catherine sets down her cup with hands that remain steady despite the tremor in her chest. "And if I say no, you won't be forced." His voice softens fractiously. "But I can't send you back to Morrison either." He'd kill you or worse. The acknowledgement hangs between them like smoke from the fire. Catherine knows he speaks truth. Morrison's eyes had held promises of things far worse than scrubbing floors and enduring insults. She is trapped between acceptance and destruction, with no third option presenting itself. "What exactly do you expect from me?" she asks. Jeremiah stares into the fire as if seeking answers in its dancing flames. "I expect you to be here, to make this place feel less like a tomb, to remind me that I'm still alive, even when I wish I wasn't." The honesty strikes Catherine like a physical blow. She has spent months being treated as property, as burden, as punishment for crimes she did not commit. But this man, this stranger who paid gold for her freedom, asks only for her presence. Not her body, not her service, not her surrender of self. Simply her existence in a place where existence has become the hardest thing of all. "You lost them in the mine," she says. Not a question, but recognition of shared grief. Jeremiah's hands tighten around his cup until knuckles show white through weathered skin. "I killed them in the mine. There's a difference." The words fall like stones into still water, creating ripples that spread through the cabin's warmth. Catherine waits for explanation, but none comes. Some stories, she knows, require time and trust before they can be safely spoken aloud. "How long ago?" 9 years. 9 years. 4 months. 16 days. He speaks the numbers with mathematical precision. "Since the day I decided company profits mattered more than human lives." Catherine rises from her chair and moves to the photograph on the wall. The woman's face smiles back at her with serene confidence. The expression of someone who believed in her husband's goodness without reservation. The boys' faces shine with pride in their father, trust that he would always keep them safe. "What were their names?" "Elizabeth." Jeremiah's voice cracks slightly. "Thomas, Samuel. They look happy." "They were, until I failed them." Catherine turns from the photograph to study the man who guards their memory like a dragon guarding treasure. Grief has carved lines into his face that speak of years spent in careful solitude, nurturing guilt like other men nurture gardens. But beneath the surface damage, she glimpses something that might be hope struggling to survive in hostile soil. "Mr. Kane," she says formally, "I appreciate your honesty about your expectations, but I need you to understand something about me as well." He looks up from his coffee, storm-colored eyes alert. "I am not broken," Catherine continues, her voice gaining strength with each word. "I am not damaged goods or a fallen woman or any of the other things Morrison called me. I am a human being who chose to protect children rather than protect my reputation. If you want my presence in your home, you will have it, but you'll have it with my dignity intact." Jeremiah studies her face for a long moment, as if seeing her clearly for the first time since entering Morrison's saloon. Something shifts in his expression, a recognition that perhaps he has purchased more than simple companionship. "Yes, ma'am," he says finally. "I believe that arrangement will suit us both." The fire settles lower in the grate, casting longer shadows across the cabin's interior. Outside, the storm continues its assault on the mountains, but here in this space carved from wilderness and maintained by stubborn will, two wounded souls begin the delicate process of learning to exist in proximity without causing additional damage. Catherine returns to her chair and picks up her coffee cup. The liquid has cooled, but still carries warmth enough to comfort. Across from her, Jeremiah stares into flames that reflect off his eyes like distant lightning. "There's a spare room," he says eventually. "Clean blankets, good mattress. You can make it your own." "Thank you. Breakfast is at dawn. Coffee's always hot if you want it earlier." "I'm an early riser." "Good." He finishes his coffee and sets the cup aside. "One more thing, sister." Catherine waits. "You might want to stop calling yourself by that title. You're not church property anymore. You're not anyone's property." The words hit her like revelation. For 15 years, she has defined herself by her relationship to an institution that ultimately betrayed her trust. Sister Catherine, bound by vows to serve others and submit to authority. But those vows were broken not by her choice, but by the corrupt actions of men who valued gold more than souls. "What should I call myself?" Jeremiah stands and moves toward what must be his bedroom door. "Whatever you want, you're free to choose." He pauses at the threshold, firelight casting his shadow across the cabin floor like a sundial marking time's passage. Catherine, he says, testing her name without the religious title. It suits you better. The door closes softly behind him, leaving Catherine alone with the fire and the photograph and the slowly growing realization that perhaps, against all odds and expectations, she might actually be safe. Outside, the mountain wind continues to howl its ancient song of endurance and survival. But inside, in the warmth of a cabin built by love and maintained by memory, two broken souls begin the long journey towards something that might eventually resemble healing. The fire burns lower, casting dancing shadows that seem to move with purpose and intent. Catherine pulls the borrowed coat closer around her shoulders and watches flames consume split pine with patient hunger. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, new negotiations of space and expectation, in the careful dance of two people learning to share solitude. But tonight, for the first time in months, she sleeps without fear. The mountain remembers everything, but sometimes, rarely, it also offers forgiveness to those brave enough to seek it in the company of other wounded hearts. Dawn comes to Copper Ridge like a whispered promise, pale light seeping through pine boughs heavy with fresh snow. The storm has passed, leaving the world transformed into something crystalline and clean, as if the mountain has shed its old skin overnight. Inside the cabin, embers still glow in the fireplace, casting amber shadows across walls that have witnessed too many solitary mornings. Catherine wakes to the sound of metal striking metal, a rhythmic hammering that echoes across the valley like a heartbeat made audible. She lies still for a moment, wrapped in blankets that smell of cedar and wood smoke, listening to a sound she has not heard in 9 years. The forge is alive again. Through the small window beside her bed, she can see Jeremiah working at his anvil in the lean-to shed that adjoins the cabin. His massive frame moves with practiced efficiency as he shapes heated iron into something useful, something necessary. Steam rises from his shoulders where snow melts against warm flesh, and his breath forms clouds in the frigid air. But there is purpose in his movements now, direction in his labor that was absent the night before. Catherine dresses quietly in clothes that Morrison provided, rough fabric that chafes against skin, accustomed to the softer materials of convent life. Her reflection in the small mirror above the wash basin shows a woman she barely recognizes. Gone is the serene expression of Sister Catherine, the carefully composed mask that served her well through years of prayer and service. In its place stands someone harder, more alert, eyes that have learned to watch for danger in every shadow. The kitchen area reveals evidence of Jeremiah's early rising. Coffee percolates on the stove, filling the cabin with rich aroma that speaks of comfort and routine. Fresh biscuits sit cooling on a wooden board, their surfaces golden and inviting. But it is the careful way everything has been arranged that touches Catherine most deeply. 2 plates instead of 1, 2 cups waiting to be filled, 2 chairs positioned at angles that allow conversation without forcing intimacy. A man who claims to need only presence has prepared for companionship. Catherine pours coffee into both cups and steps outside into air so cold it burns her lungs. The world spreads below like a map drawn in white ink, valleys and ridges flowing toward distant peaks that pierce the sky like cathedral spires. This is wilderness in its purest form, untouched by human ambition or the corruption that seems to follow civilization wherever it takes root. Jeremiah looks up from his work as she approaches, hammer pausing mid-strike. Sweat beads his forehead despite the cold, and his eyes hold the focused intensity of a man wrestling demons into submission one blow at a time. "Coffee's ready," Catherine says, offering him one of the steaming cups. He sets down his hammer and accepts the drink with hands that dwarf the tin cup completely. "Thank you. Sleep well?" "Better than I have in months." She studies the piece of iron cooling on his anvil, trying to decipher its intended purpose. "What are you making?" "Horseshoe nails." Jeremiah drinks deeply, savoring the coffee's heat. "Thunder threw a shoe yesterday climbing up here. Can't have him going lame with winter coming on hard." The practical nature of the task strikes Catherine as somehow reassuring. Here is a man focused on immediate needs rather than grand gestures, on solving problems rather than creating them. The iron under his hammer will become something useful, something that serves a purpose beyond mere decoration or display. "May I watch?" Jeremiah glances at her with surprise that might be genuine or carefully manufactured. "If you want." gets loud and the sparks can burn. Catherine settles on a wooden stool positioned against the shed's wall, coffee cup cradled in both hands for warmth. From this vantage point, she can observe both the blacksmith's art and the man who practices it. Jeremiah returns to his work with movements that speak of decades spent mastering fire and iron, transforming raw materials into objects of precise utility. The process fascinates her, heating metal until it glows like captured sunlight, then shaping it through controlled violence into forms that serve human need. There is something almost sacred about the transformation, something that speaks to deeper truths about the nature of suffering and redemption. "You learned this from your father?" she asks during a pause while Jeremiah reheats the iron. "Grandfather, my father was a mining engineer, like I was." The words carry weight that has nothing to do with their literal meaning. Grandfather Cain believed a man should know how to make things with his own hands. Said it kept you humble. Wise man. He was. Jeremiah positions the heated metal carefully before raising his hammer. Died before I got stupid enough to forget his lessons. The hammer falls with precise force, shaping recalcitrant iron through patient repetition. Each blow serves a purpose, moving the metal incrementally closer to its intended form. Catherine finds herself mesmerized by the rhythm, by the dance between human will and natural material that defines the blacksmith's art. "Tell me about the mine," she says softly. The hammer pauses mid-stroke. Jeremiah's shoulders tense beneath his leather apron, and for a moment, Catherine thinks he will refuse to answer. But then he sets down his tools and turns to face her directly. "You sure you want to hear it?" "I think I need to understand." Jeremiah stares past her toward the distant peaks, his eyes focusing on something beyond the visible horizon. When he speaks, his voice carries the careful modulation of a man reciting facts too painful for emotional inflection. "Copper Ridge Mining Company hired me in 1867 to engineer their expansion into the North Face. Good job, decent pay, chance to provide for my family properly. Elizabeth was pregnant with our third child, and the boys were getting old enough to need real schooling. I thought I was building us a future." He picks up a file and begins smoothing rough edges from the horseshoe nail, his movements automatic and precise. The company pushed for faster extraction, deeper shafts, bigger profits. They brought in investors from back east who'd never seen a mine but knew plenty about pressure and deadlines. Catherine remains silent, understanding that this story will emerge at its own pace or not at all. October 15th, 1869. Jeremiah's voice drops to barely above a whisper. "Inspector warned me about the new shaft we'd been driving into the North Face. Said the timber was green, the supports insufficient for the load. Said if we sent men down there, somebody was going to die." The file continues its steady rasping against metal, creating small piles of iron dust that glitter in the morning light. "I had a choice. Shut down the shaft and lose 6 months of work, disappoint the investors, probably lose my job, or trust in luck, in engineering, and the hope that nothing would go wrong." Catherine's chest tightens as she realizes where this story must lead. Elizabeth needed medicine the doctor said would help with the pregnancy. Thomas was talking about college, about becoming an engineer like his father. Samuel wanted a pony more than anything in the world. Jeremiah looks up from his work, meeting Catherine's gaze directly. "So I chose money over safety. I chose ambition over wisdom. I told the company the shaft was ready for full operation. The morning air carries the scent of wood smoke and pine resin, clean smells that contrast sharply with the weight of Jeremiah's confession. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk cries with voice that echoes off stone walls like a lament for the dead. "They went down at dawn shift," Jeremiah continues. "Elizabeth insisted on bringing them lunch. Said the boys were working so hard they forgot to eat properly. I was in my office reviewing extraction schedules when I heard the rumble. His hand still completely, file forgotten in his grip, sounded like thunder coming from inside the mountain. By the time I reached the shaft head, there was nothing but dust and darkness. 14 men trapped below, including my whole world." Catherine sets down her coffee cup and moves closer, drawn by the naked pain in his voice. "How long before you could reach them?" 3 days, 72 hours of digging through collapsed rock with everything we could find. Pickaxes, shovels, bare hands when the tools broke. I worked until my fingernails split and bled, until I couldn't feel my arms anymore. kept calling their names, kept believing I'd hear them answer. The file begins moving again, metal against metal, creating a sound like grinding teeth. Found them in a pocket about 20 feet from the main shaft. Samuel was holding Elizabeth's hand. Thomas had positioned himself between them and the worst of the debris. They died protecting each other while their husband and father sat safe in his office counting potential profits. Silence settles over the forge like snow, muffling all sound except the distant whisper of wind through pine boughs. Catherine understands now why Jeremiah fled to the mountains, why he speaks of needing rather than loving, why he hammers iron with the intensity of a man beating his own guilt into submission. The company paid for the funerals, he says finally. Generous settlement for the families of the dead. They even offered me a promotion, recognition for my dedication during the rescue effort. I took their money and disappeared into the wilderness before I did something that would get me hanged. Catherine reaches out slowly, covering his free hand with both of hers. His skin feels rough and warm, marked by years of honest labor and honest grief. It wasn't your fault. Wasn't it? Jeremiah's laugh holds no humor. I knew that shaft was dangerous. Inspector told me, plain as daylight. But I weighed lives against profits and decided money was worth the risk. You couldn't have known. I could have. I should have. He gently extracts his hand from her grip and returns to his work. That's why I came here, Catherine. That's why I need someone to remind me I'm still human instead of the monster who killed his own family for copper prices. The horseshoe nail takes shape under his patient attention, transformed from raw iron into something useful through heat and pressure and time. Catherine watches this process and thinks about redemption, about second chances, about the possibility that some sins might be forgiven even when they cannot be forgotten. Show me the graves, she says quietly. Jeremiah's hammer pauses again. You don't want to see that? Yes, I do. He studies her face for a long moment, searching for something that might be understanding or acceptance or simple human kindness. Whatever he sees there must satisfy him, because he sets aside his tools and gestures toward a path that leads up the ridge behind the cabin. The graves sit on a natural shelf of stone overlooking the valley, positioned to catch the first light of dawn and the last glow of sunset. 3 simple headstones carved from local granite mark the resting places of Elizabeth Kane, Thomas Kane, and Samuel Kane. Fresh pine boughs decorate each grave, and small wildflowers have been planted in careful rows despite the approaching winter. Catherine kneels before the graves and offers a silent prayer for souls she never knew but feels connected to through shared loss and the love of a man who carries their memory like a physical burden. The headstones bear simple inscriptions that speak of devotion rather than grief, remembrance rather than despair. Beloved wife and mother, cherished son and brother, precious child of God. You tend them well, Catherine observes, noting the careful maintenance that speaks of regular visits and consistent care. It's the least I can do. Jeremiah stands with hands clasped behind his back, staring down at the valley where morning light turns snow into fields of scattered diamonds. They deserve better than they got from me. Catherine rises and brushes snow from her skirt. Around them, the mountain stretches in all directions, vast and eternal and indifferent to human suffering. But here in this small space carved from wilderness, love persists beyond death, tended by a man who refuses to forgive himself for being human. They would want you to live, she says softly. Would they? Or would they want justice for the man who killed them? The question hangs in the cold air like incense. Catherine turns to study Jeremiah's profile, noting the way grief has carved lines around his eyes and mouth, the careful way he holds himself as if expecting punishment from an uncertain heaven. I think they would want you to remember that love forgives what justice cannot reach. They return to the cabin in comfortable silence, boots crunching through snow that sparkles like crushed crystal under the strengthening sun. The forge fire has burned low during their absence, requiring fresh coal and careful attention to restore its heat. Jeremiah tends it with the same gentle efficiency he applies to all tasks, building flame through patience rather than force. I'll start breakfast, Catherine offers. Kitchen's yours if you want it. She moves through the cabin's interior with growing familiarity, noting details that escaped her attention the previous evening. Books line shelves near the fireplace, volumes on engineering and metallurgy mixed with poetry and philosophy, in a combination that speaks of broad interests in deep thinking. A chess set sits on a small table, pieces arranged mid-game as if waiting for an opponent who will never return. The kitchen reveals evidence of a man who takes care of himself without taking pleasure in the process. Supplies are well organized and adequately stocked, but there is no evidence of the small luxuries that make cooking a joy rather than a chore. Fresh eggs from chickens that must be housed somewhere nearby, bacon that smells of honest smoke and careful curing, flour ground fine enough for proper biscuits. Catherine works with the unconscious rhythm of someone trained in institutional cooking, movements economical and precise. But she finds herself humming while she cracks eggs into a cast iron skillet, a hymn learned in childhood and preserved through years of morning prayers. The melody fills the cabin's interior with something approaching contentment. From the forge comes the steady ring of hammer against anvil, a counterpoint rhythm that transforms her humming into something like harmony. This domestic symphony, music created by two people sharing space and purpose without formal acknowledgement of their cooperation, feels more intimate than any conversation. Breakfast passes quietly, both of them content to eat without feeling compelled to fill silence with meaningless words. Catherine notices how Jeremiah cuts his bacon into precise pieces, how he drinks his coffee black and strong, how his eyes dart toward the window whenever wind rattles the glass. These are the observations of proximity, details that accumulate slowly between people who share days rather than mere moments. "I need to check the trap lines today," Jeremiah says as he finishes his eggs. "Make sure the storm didn't damage anything. You're welcome to come along if you want." Catherine considers the invitation, weighing her desire for activity against the comfort of staying warm and dry. "I'd like that, but I should warn you, I'm not much of an outdoors woman. You'll learn, Mountain doesn't give you much choice about that." They prepare for the expedition with the thoroughness of people who understand that wilderness mistakes can be fatal. Extra clothing, emergency supplies, tools for repairing damaged traps, or clearing fallen trees from trails. Jeremiah moves through the preparations with automatic efficiency, but Catherine notices how he double-checks everything, how his eyes scan continuously for potential problems. This is a man who has learned that disaster can strike without warning when vigilance lapses. The trail leads down from the cabin through stands of pine and aspen, following natural contours that suggest long use by both human and animal travelers. Snow lies deep in places where wind has sculpted it into drifts, but Jeremiah knows where to step to avoid the worst of it. He moves through the forest with the quiet confidence of someone completely at home in this environment. Catherine struggles to match his pace, her convent shoes slipping on hidden ice and catching in snow that conceals roots and rocks. When she stumbles for the third time in as many minutes, Jeremiah stops and studies her footwear with obvious concern. "Those shoes won't last a week up here," he observes. "You need boots if you're going to be walking mountain trails." "I'll make do with what I have." "No, you won't." His tone carries gentle finality. "I've got leather in the cabin. I'll make you a proper pair tonight." The casual offer strikes Catherine as somehow significant, evidence that he is planning for her long-term presence rather than treating her as a temporary inconvenience. She feels something warm spread through her chest that has nothing to do with physical exertion. "Thank you." The first trap yields a fat rabbit, its neck cleanly broken by the spring mechanism Jeremiah designed and built himself. He resets the device with movements that speak of long practice, checking the trigger sensitivity and bait placement with the attention to detail that characterizes all his work. "Seems cruel," Catherine observes, watching him secure the dead animal to his pack. "Crueler to let it starve when the deep snows come," Jeremiah replies. "Nature doesn't recognize mercy as a virtue. Up here, you eat or you die, and everything else is philosophy for people with full bellies." The harsh pragmatism of his words contrasts with the gentleness of his actions as he handles the rabbit's body. This is not a man who enjoys killing, Catherine realizes, but one who accepts necessity without flinching from its demands. There is something admirable in his refusal to romanticize survival, to pretend that mountain life offers easy choices. They check 6 more traps as the morning progresses, finding them empty but undamaged by the storm. Jeremiah explains the principles behind his placement decisions, how animal behavior patterns and weather conditions determine where game is most likely to travel. His knowledge of the wilderness runs deep, accumulated through years of patient observation and hard-earned experience. You could have been a teacher, Catherine says as they rest beside a stream that runs fast and clear, despite the cold. Was for a while, before the mine. Jeremiah sits on a fallen log and pulls out a piece of jerky to share. Taught basic engineering to apprentices who wanted to learn more than how to swing a pickaxe. Elizabeth said I was good at it. The mention of his wife's name brings a shadow across his face, but not the complete shutdown Catherine has witnessed before. Perhaps time and repeated telling have worn the sharpest edges from his grief. Or perhaps sharing the story with some who listens without judgment has begun some process of healing he doesn't yet recognize. What would she think of your life now? Jeremiah chews thoughtfully before answering. She'd probably want to know why I stopped bathing regularly and let my hair grow like a wild man's. Elizabeth believed cleanliness was next to godliness. The small joke surprises Catherine. She has not heard him attempt humor before, has seen only the grim determination that characterizes his approach to survival. But here, surrounded by natural beauty and sharing simple food, something lighter emerges from beneath the weight of self-imposed penance. Maybe she'd understand, Catherine says carefully. Maybe she'd know that some wounds need time to heal properly. Maybe. Jeremiah stands and brushes crumbs from his coat. Or maybe she'd tell me to stop feeling sorry for myself and get back to the business of living. They follow the stream for another mile before turning back toward the cabin, their path taking them past meadows where deer tracks crisscross the snow and ravens call from treetops with voices like rusty hinges. The sun climbs higher, warming the air enough to make walking pleasant despite the cold that numbs exposed skin. Catherine finds herself studying Jeremiah's profile as he leads the way home. The harsh planes of his face soften slightly in natural light, revealing traces of the teacher he once was beneath the hermit he has become. His eyes scan constantly for signs of danger or change, but they also note small beauties. A hawk circling overhead. Patterns of frost on a pine bough. The way light filters through snow-laden branches to create cathedral spaces in the forest. This is not a man who has forgotten how to see wonder in the world. He has simply decided he no longer deserves to enjoy it. They reach the cabin as afternoon light begins to slant golden through the trees. Jeremiah immediately busies himself with cleaning the rabbit, his knife work quick and efficient as he prepares meat for their evening meal. Catherine watches the process with fascination rather than revulsion, noting how nothing is wasted, how even the bones will be saved for soup stock. I'll start the stew, she offers. Kitchen's yours. The easy repetition of morning's phrase creates a sense of routine that feels almost domestic. Catherine moves through food preparation with growing confidence, adding herbs she finds in small jars on the kitchen shelves, adjusting seasoning by taste and instinct. Outside, she can hear Jeremiah working with leather, cutting and stitching by lamplight as he crafts boots that will fit her feet properly. The simple act of making something specifically for her needs touches Catherine more deeply than grander gestures might. This is practical kindness, attention to details that matter in daily life. The boots will keep her feet warm and dry, will allow her to walk mountain trails without fear of injury. They represent investment in her continued presence, evidence that he values her comfort enough to spend time ensuring it. Dinner passes with conversation that ranges from practical matters to philosophical questions, topics that arise naturally without forced intimacy or awkward silences. Jeremiah speaks knowledgeably about subjects beyond mining and metallurgy, revealing an education that encompasses literature and history as well as technical skills. Catherine finds herself sharing memories of convent life that focus on learning rather than loss, stories that reveal her own breadth of knowledge and interest. They are, she realizes, well-matched intellectually despite the vast differences in their recent experiences. Both have minds that question and analyze, that find satisfaction in understanding how things work and why events unfold as they do. This compatibility of thought creates common ground that makes shared silence comfortable rather than strained. After dinner, Jeremiah presents her with the finished boots. The leather is soft but strong, dyed rich brown and stitched with careful attention to both function and appearance. They fit her feet perfectly, supporting her ankles while allowing freedom of movement. She walks around the cabin testing them, marveling at how much more secure she feels with proper footwear. They're beautiful, she says sincerely. Thank you. They'll last you years if you take care of them properly. Jeremiah banks the fire for the night, his movements automatic and precise. Oil the leather monthly, let them dry completely if they get soaked, replace the laces when they start to fray. The practical advice carries undertones of assumed longevity, suggestions that she will be present long enough for proper boot maintenance to matter. Catherine feels that same warmth spreading in her chest, recognition that plans are being made that include her continued presence in this mountain sanctuary. Jeremiah, she says as he prepares to retire to his room. He pauses, waiting. Thank you for today, for showing me the graves, for sharing your memories. I know it wasn't easy. Something shifts in his expression, a slight relaxation of the careful control he maintains over his emotions. Thank you for listening without trying to fix things that can't be repaired. The words carry weight beyond their literal meaning. Acknowledgement that she has passed some test of understanding or acceptance that others might have failed. Catherine feels the fragile beginning of something that might eventually become friendship. Trust built on shared honesty about pain that cannot be easily healed. But as she prepares for sleep in her small room, Catherine notices something that makes her pulse quicken with unexpected alarm. Through the window that faces down the valley, she can see lights moving through the forest. Not the steady glow of lanterns, but the erratic flicker of torches carried by men who travel at night for reasons they prefer to keep hidden. Someone is coming up the mountain, someone who does not wish to be seen. Catherine watches the lights climb slowly toward the cabin, following the same trail she and Jeremiah used that morning. There are at least 4 separate sources, possibly more hidden by the forest darkness. They move with purpose rather than random wandering, following a path that suggests familiarity with the terrain. Her first instinct is to wake Jeremiah immediately, but something makes her pause, some intuition that speaking too quickly might trigger responses that cannot be easily contained. Instead, she continues watching as the lights grow closer, trying to count their number and gauge their probable arrival time. The lights stop moving. For several minutes, they remain stationary about half a mile down the trail, clustering together as if for a consultation or planning. Then they separate, spreading out in a pattern that suggests tactical thinking rather than casual approach. Catherine's breath fogs the window glass as understanding strikes her like a physical blow. These are not lost travelers seeking shelter. These are men who know exactly where they are going and exactly what they plan to do when they arrive. Morrison has come to reclaim his property. She moves quickly but quietly to Jeremiah's door, tapping softly on the wood panel. Jeremiah, I think we have visitors coming. The response is immediate, the sound of someone who sleeps lightly and wakes completely. How many? At least 4, maybe more. They stopped moving about 10 minutes ago, but they're positioned around the cabin approach. Footsteps cross the floor, and the door opens to reveal Jeremiah fully dressed and holding a rifle that gleams with careful maintenance. His eyes hold the alert intensity of a man who has been expecting this moment, dreading it but not surprised by its arrival. Morrison? I think so. Jeremiah nods grimly and moves to the main window, positioning himself where he can observe the approaching lights without being visible from outside. Get dressed warmly and stay away from the windows. This might get loud before it's over. Catherine retreats to her room and pulls on the boots he made for her, noting absently how their solid construction makes her feel more prepared for whatever is coming. Outside, the lights begin moving again, converging on the cabin with the inevitability of a winter storm. The mountain remembers everything, including the price of defying men who mistake cruelty for strength. But tonight on Copper Ridge, 2 people who have learned to trust each other will discover whether shared courage can overcome superior numbers and the advantage of surprise. The lights grow closer, and with them comes the sound of voices carried on the wind, like promises of violence yet to come. The torches circle the cabin like predatory eyes in the darkness, each flame casting restless shadows that dance across snow-covered ground. Jeremiah counts them methodically from his position beside the main window, rifle ready, but not yet raised to firing position. 4 lights visible, but Morrison is too cunning to show his full strength at once. There will be more men hidden in the tree line, positioned to cut off escape routes or provide covering fire when the shooting starts. And it will start. Men like Morrison do not climb mountains in winter storms to negotiate. Catherine, Jeremiah speaks without turning from the window. There's a root cellar beneath the kitchen floorboards. Trapdoors hidden under the rag rug. If things go badly, you get down there and stay put until sunrise. I'm not hiding while you fight my battles. The steel in her voice surprises him. When he glances back, he sees her standing beside the fireplace with a poker gripped in both hands, her stance suggesting someone prepared to use it. The frightened woman from Morrison's saloon has been replaced by someone harder, more resolved, tempered by mountain air and honest conversation into something approaching iron. This isn't your fight, Jeremiah says firmly. Yes, it is. Catherine moves us to the window opposite his position, peering through glass frosted with ice crystals. They came for me. If blood gets spilled tonight, it's because Morrison thinks he owns something that was never his to claim. Outside, the torches stop moving. Voices carry on the wind, too distant for individual words, but close enough to convey intent. Men discussing strategy, dividing responsibilities, preparing for violence with the casual efficiency of professionals who have done such work before. Kane, Morrison's voice cuts through the night air like a blade. I know you're in there with my property. Send her out and we can settle this like civilized men. Jeremiah's grip tightens on his rifle stock. Your property was the gold I paid you. Nothing more. That gold was for services rendered, not for ownership transfer. Morrison's laugh carries notes of genuine amusement. You think you can buy a woman like livestock and call it legal? I've got papers saying different. Papers. The word strikes both Catherine and Jeremiah simultaneously, carrying implications that transform tonight's confrontation from simple kidnapping into something more complex and dangerous. Legal documents can be manufactured, especially in territories where law enforcement remains sparse and corruption runs deep as mountain rivers. What kind of papers? Catherine calls out before Jeremiah can stop her. Bishop's debt assignment. Morrison sounds pleased that she asked. Signed and witnessed, transferring all obligations to me personally. You belong to me until every penny gets repaid with appropriate interest. The words hit Catherine like physical blows. She has been running from Morrison's immediate threat without considering the broader legal framework that might support his claims. In a territory where women's rights remain limited and church authority carries significant weight, fabricated documents could provide sufficient justification for actions that would otherwise constitute obvious crimes. Show me the papers, Jeremiah demands. Open your door and I'll be happy to present them for inspection. Slide them under the door. Morrison's laughter echoes off stone walls and pine boughs. I don't think so, Kane. You come out here where we can discuss terms properly, or I start shooting holes in your cabin until you change your mind about cooperation. The threat hangs in the cold air like smoke from dying fires. Jeremiah knows his cabin's construction well enough to understand its limitations under sustained gunfire. The logs will stop rifle bullets, but the windows present obvious targets, and the roof remains vulnerable to anyone who climbs high enough on the surrounding ridges. More importantly, winter siege works in the attacker's favor. Morrison's men can retreat to lower elevations for supplies and reinforcement, while the cabin's occupants remain trapped by snow and isolation. This confrontation must end tonight, one way or another. Give me 10 minutes to consider your offer, Jeremiah calls back. 5 minutes. Then I start getting impatient. Jeremiah steps back from the window and turns to face Catherine directly. In the firelight, her face shows determination mixed with fear, courage wrestling with the practical recognition of overwhelming odds. She meets his gaze without flinching, waiting for whatever plan he might propose. The legal papers won't matter if Morrison's dead, he says quietly. You can't kill 4 men by yourself. Maybe not, but I can try. Catherine sets down the fireplace poker and moves closer, her voice dropping to match his whisper. There might be another way. I'm listening. Morrison wants me alive. Dead women don't pay debts or provide the services he's really after. If I surrender voluntarily, he might let you live. The suggestion strikes Jeremiah like a hammer blow to the chest. He has spent 9 years in self-imposed exile, convinced that his failures cost lives that should have been preserved. The thought of watching Catherine walk into Morrison's hands, of surviving while she faces horrors he can imagine all too clearly, represents a repetition of his greatest failure, magnified beyond endurance. No. It makes sense strategically. No. Jeremiah, be practical. You can't save me if you're dead. He steps close enough to see his reflection in her green eyes, close enough to smell the faint scent of pine soap she uses for washing. This woman who came to his mountain as damaged goods has become something precious, something worth protecting regardless of cost or consequence. I won't lose someone else to my cowardice. This isn't cowardice. This is intelligent tactics. It's surrender, and I'm done surrendering. Outside, Morrison's voice rises again with the impatience of a man accustomed to having his demands met quickly. Time's up, Kane. What's your answer? Jeremiah returns to the window, rifle raised to shooting position. My answer is that you're trespassing on my land. Leave now or face the consequences. Your land? Morrison sounds genuinely amused. You might want to check the county records, Kane. This property belongs to Copper Ridge Mining Company as payment for debts incurred by their former chief engineer. I've got legal right to be here, and you're the one trespassing. The revelation hits like an avalanche. Jeremiah had assumed his retreat to the mountains provided legal as well as physical sanctuary. That isolation would protect him from claims arising from the mine disaster. But mining companies possess long memories and patient lawyers, especially when valuable property stands to be recovered through foreclosure proceedings. Catherine sees the shock on his face and understands immediately. They've been planning this for months. Morrison didn't come here just for me. He came to evict you from land he now owns legally. Which means we're both trespassers, Jeremiah says grimly, and he's within his rights to use force removing us. The legal framework shifts everything. What began as simple kidnapping has become property recovery with law enforcement authority behind it. Morrison can claim justification for any violence that occurs, can present himself as a legitimate businessman, protecting his interests from armed squatters. Then we fight anyway, Catherine says firmly. You don't understand. If he's got legal papers, killing him won't solve anything. The company will just send more men, probably with official badges to make resistance impossible. So what do you suggest? Jeremiah stares through the window at torches that seem to burn brighter as confidence grows among their bearers. Morrison has played his hand expertly, combining personal vendetta with business opportunity to create a situation where law supports his desires and resistance appears futile. But sometimes futile gestures matter more than practical calculations. I suggest we make them work for it. The first gunshot shatters the night silence like breaking glass. The bullet punches through the cabin's main window, spraying glass across the floor and embedding itself in the opposite wall with solid finality. Morrison has grown tired of negotiation and decided to advance matters through direct action. Jeremiah drops below the windowsill and signals for Catherine to do the same. Stay low and keep moving. Don't present a stationary target. More shots follow, muzzle flashes lighting the forest like deadly fireflies. Bullets punch through windows, splinter wooden shutters, and send splinters flying from log walls struck at oblique angles. The men outside have positioned themselves well, creating crossfire that makes movement within the cabin increasingly dangerous. Catherine crawls toward the kitchen area, seeking cover behind the heavy iron stove. How long can we hold out? Until our ammunition runs out or they decide burning us out is easier than shooting us out. Jeremiah fires through the broken window, aiming at muzzle flashes rather than clearly visible targets. His shot draws immediate response, 3 rifles sending bullets through the space his head occupied moments before. The pattern becomes clear quickly. Morrison's men are not trying to kill them immediately. They are applying pressure, making the cabin uncomfortable and dangerous while avoiding the risks that come with direct assault. This is siege warfare designed to break morale rather than charge defensive positions. Time favors the attackers. They can maintain their positions indefinitely, taking turns to rest and eat, while the cabin's occupants remain trapped without relief. When dawn comes, they will have clear sight lines for accurate shooting, making survival a matter of minutes rather than hours. Jeremiah reaches this conclusion with the cold logic of someone trained in military engineering. Defensive positions require supply lines and reinforcement opportunities. The cabin provides neither, making prolonged resistance effectively impossible, regardless of determination or courage. Catherine, he calls during a lull in the shooting, I want you to know something. What? These past few days, having you here, talking with someone who listens without judging. It's been the first time in 9 years I've felt human instead of just existing. A bullet punches through the roof, sending dust and debris cascading from the ceiling. Catherine flinches, but maintains her position behind the stove. You're talking like we're already dead. Maybe we are. But if so, I want you to understand that your presence here meant something. You saved me in ways you probably don't realize. The words carry weight beyond their immediate meaning, confession and gratitude wrapped in the acknowledgement that some things matter more than survival. Catherine feels tears start in her eyes, not from fear, but from recognition that this man has found a way to value connection even when facing annihilation. Jeremiah, she says softly. Yes? I need to tell you something too. More gunshots interrupt her words, forcing both of them to remain pressed against the floor while bullets search for flesh above concealing furniture. When silence returns, Catherine raises her voice enough to be heard across the cabin's interior. I lied about why I left the convent. Jeremiah's rifle pauses mid-reload. What do you mean? I wasn't protecting orphans from Bishop Cordovan. I was protecting them from Morrison. The words come out in a rush, confession long suppressed finally finding voice. Morrison has contracts with brothels in Denver and San Francisco. He buys young girls from corrupt church officials and ships them west, where questions won't be asked. The revelation reframes everything they thought they understood about tonight's confrontation. This is not random greed or opportunistic land grabbing. This is Morrison tying up loose ends, eliminating witnesses to trafficking operations that could destroy him if exposed to proper authorities. How many girls? Jeremiah asks. 12 from our convent alone, probably dozens from other church facilities across the territory. Catherine's voice carries guilt and rage in equal measure. I tried to stop one shipment and got caught. Bishop Cordovan chose to protect his business partner rather than his moral obligations. So you never stole money. I stole something more valuable. I stole information, names, dates, financial records, everything needed to expose the whole network to federal authorities. Jeremiah processes this information while continuing to monitor the positions of Morrison's men outside. The stakes have escalated far beyond personal vendetta or property disputes. Catherine possesses evidence that could destroy a criminal enterprise worth thousands of dollars and implicate dozens of prominent citizens in systematic corruption. Where is the information now? Hidden in the convent, sewn into the binding of a prayer book I left behind. Morrison knows I have it, but he doesn't know where I hid it, which is why he needs you alive and cooperative. Exactly. Dead martyrs can't reveal hiding places. The tactical situation shifts dramatically with this new understanding. Morrison cannot afford to kill Catherine until he recovers the evidence that threatens his operations, but he also cannot allow her to escape with knowledge that could destroy him. Tonight's siege represents his attempt to capture her while eliminating the only witness to his current location and methods. Jeremiah rises slightly and fires toward a muzzle flash near the tree line. His shot answered immediately by two rifles that send bullets whistling past his position. The men outside maintain professional spacing and fire discipline, evidence of experience with such operations. Professional shooters, he observes grimly. Morrison hired real gunfighters, not just local toughs. Can we reach the horses? Thunder's in the lean-to. Might as well be on the moon for all the good it does us. Catherine crawls toward the window opposite Jeremiah's position, staying below the sill while trying to assess their tactical situation. The torches have been extinguished, making it impossible to count enemies or track their movements. Muzzle flashes provide the only indication of hostile positions, but experienced gunfighters know how to mask their locations between shots. What about the root cellar you mentioned? Dead end, literally. No way out except back through the cabin. So we wait for dawn and hope they make mistakes? We wait for dawn and make our peace with whatever comes after. The resignation in his voice strikes Catherine like a slap. This man who forged iron with patient determination, who carved boots from leather with careful attention to detail, who tended graves with reverent precision, has accepted defeat without exhausting every possible option. No, she says firmly. Catherine, be practical. I am being practical. She rises to a crouch, staying below the window line but preparing to move. Morrison needs me alive. He can't risk killing me with stray bullets. That gives us an advantage if we're smart enough to use it. What are you suggesting? I'm suggesting that sometimes the best defense is surrender that looks like surrender but isn't. Before Jeremiah can respond, Catherine stands and walks toward the cabin's front door. Morrison, I want to talk. Catherine, don't! But she has already lifted the door's wooden latch, opening it wide enough to step outside into the snow-covered clearing. Cold air hits her like a physical slap, but she maintains her composure as rifle barrels swing to track her movement. I'm unarmed, she calls out. I want to negotiate. Morrison's voice emerges from the darkness near the cabin's eastern corner. Smart girl. Kane, you stay inside while the lady and I discuss terms. Catherine steps further from the door, moving toward the center of the clearing where moonlight makes her clearly visible to all shooters. Snow crunches under her boots as she positions herself equidistant from the concealed gunmen, presenting them with a targeting problem that requires careful coordination to avoid crossfire accidents. I know what you really want, she says loudly enough for all to hear. And I know what it's worth to you. Morrison emerges from behind a large pine tree, rifle held ready but not aimed directly at her. In the moonlight, his face shows the satisfied expression of a man who has achieved his primary objective through superior planning and execution. Do you indeed? And what exactly do I want, sister? Evidence, documents, information that could hang you and half the territorial government if it reached the right authorities. Morrison's smile widens. Clever girl, much cleverer than Bishop Cordovan gave you credit for. Yes, I want that information, and you're going to help me retrieve it. In exchange for what? In exchange for Kane's life. Refuse, and I burn this cabin with him inside it. Cooperate, and he gets to live as my guest until we conclude our business in Denver. The offer sounds reasonable on the surface, but Catherine recognizes the deception underneath. Morrison cannot afford to leave witnesses alive once he recovers the evidence. Jeremiah's death has been decided already. Only the timing remains negotiable. I need guarantees, she says, playing for time while calculating distances and possibilities. You need to accept reality. You're in no position to demand anything. Actually, I think I am. Catherine's hand drops toward her boot, movements casual and unthreatening until her fingers close around the handle of Jeremiah's spare skinning knife. In one fluid motion, she draws the blade and places its edge against her own throat, steel glinting in the moonlight like liquid mercury. One wrong move, and I cut my own throat, she announces calmly. Dead women don't reveal hiding places, Morrison. Dead women don't negotiate with corrupt bishops. Dead women become martyrs whose stories inspire federal investigations. The tableau freezes like a photograph. 4 rifles remain trained on Catherine from different positions, but none of their bearers dare fire while she maintains the blade against her carotid artery. Morrison's face shows frustration mixed with grudging admiration for tactics he did not anticipate. You're bluffing. Am I? How well do you know me, Morrison? How many conversations have we shared? How much do you really understand about what I'm willing to sacrifice for principle? The questions hang in the cold air while Morrison weighs odds and alternatives. Catherine can see his mind working, calculating costs and benefits with the speed of long practice. She has transformed herself from captive into liability, from asset into potential disaster. Kane, Morrison calls without taking his eyes off Catherine. Come out here where we can discuss this properly. No deals with men who traffic in children. Jeremiah's voice carries clearly from the cabin's interior. Come and take what you want, if you think you can. Morrison's patience finally snaps. Shoot the cabin. Don't hit the girl, but turn everything else into kindling. Rifles bark in rapid succession, muzzle flashes lighting the forest like artillery bombardment. Bullets punch through every window, shatter wooden shutters, and send splinters flying from log walls struck at every angle. The sustained fire continues for nearly a minute, overlapping reloads creating continuous noise that echoes off distant peaks like thunder. But Catherine remains standing with the knife at her throat, betting her life that Morrison's men will maintain fire discipline even in the heat of combat. Their shots stay high and wide, destroying property while avoiding the human target that must be preserved at all costs. When the shooting stops, silence returns like a held breath. Smoke drifts from shattered windows, and the acrid scent of gunpowder mingles with pine resin and wood dust. Morrison waits for signs of movement from within the cabin, rifle ready to resume fire at the first indication of resistance. Nothing moves except shadows cast by moonlight through bullet-torn shutters. "Kane," Morrison shouts, "answer me, or I'll assume you're dead and act accordingly." Still no response. Catherine maintains her position, but allows herself to glance toward the cabin's darkened interior. Has Jeremiah been hit by the concentrated fire? Is he lying wounded or dead among the splintered furniture and shattered glass? The possibility that her gamble has cost his life makes her grip tighten on the knife handle. "Go check," Morrison orders one of his men, "but stay alert. Wounded animals bite hardest when they're cornered." A figure detaches itself from the tree line, rifle held ready as he approaches the cabin's front door. Catherine recognizes him as one of Morrison's regular customers from the saloon, a thin man with nervous eyes who always drank alone. He moves with the careful steps of someone who expects trouble but lacks the professional confidence of experienced gunfighters. The man reaches the doorway and pauses, listening for sounds that might indicate life or death within. Then he steps across the threshold, rifle raised and ready to fire at any movement. The hammer strike comes from directly above. Jeremiah drops from the cabin's roof like an avenging angel, his blacksmith's hammer describing a perfect arc that ends at the base of the gunman's skull. The man collapses without sound, rifle clattering across wooden floorboards as his body goes limp with the finality of severed nerves. "One down," Jeremiah calls out calmly. "Who's next?" Morrison's curse carries clearly across the clearing, frustration and anger combining in words that would make devils blush. He has lost both tactical advantage and numerical superiority through overconfidence in his enemy's desperation. "Kill him," Morrison snarls. "Forget about taking prisoners." But Jeremiah has already disappeared back into the cabin's interior, moving through familiar space with the advantage of darkness and intimate knowledge of every board and beam. The remaining gunmen fire at shadows and moonbeams, their shots revealing positions without achieving results. Catherine maintains her position with knife poised, watching Morrison's face as his carefully planned operation dissolves into chaos. This man who spoke of legal papers and business arrangements now reveals his true nature, showing the casual brutality that makes trafficking in children seem like acceptable commerce. "You're losing control," she observes quietly. "Shut up." Your men are professionals, but they don't know this terrain like Jeremiah does. They're shooting at ghosts while he picks them off one by one. Morrison's rifle swings toward her with obvious intent, but the blade against her throat stops him from completing the movement. "I said shut up." And what happens when the sun rises and people in the valley start wondering about all the gunfire? How do you explain professional killers operating on land you claim to own legally? "I'll explain it however I damn well please." But Catherine can see doubt creeping into his expression, recognition that tonight's operation has exceeded acceptable risk levels. Even in territories where law enforcement remains sparse, sustained gunfights between armed groups generate questions that reach territorial and federal authorities. Another hammer blow echoes from the cabin's interior, followed by the sound of a body hitting the floor. Jeremiah's voice carries clearly through the shattered windows. "Two down, mathematics says you're running out of helpers, Morrison." Morrison's face shows rage mixed with growing fear. His careful planning has been disrupted by factors he failed to anticipate, leaving him exposed and vulnerable in ways that threaten more than tonight's objectives. "You think you're clever, Kane? You think winning tonight solves anything?" Morrison's voice rises with the desperation of a man whose options have narrowed to acceptable and unacceptable variations of disaster. "I've got legal papers that say this is my land. I've got business arrangements that span 3 territories. Kill me, and you'll have every peace officer from here to Denver hunting you for murder." "Maybe," Jeremiah's voice comes from a different window, evidence that he continues moving through the cabin's interior. "But you'll still be dead." The simple logic strikes Morrison like a hammer blow. Legal consequences matter little to men facing immediate annihilation. Jeremiah Kane has nothing left to lose except his life, and he has already demonstrated willingness to risk that for principles that transcend survival. Catherine watches Morrison's face as understanding dawns. He came here expecting to face a broken hermit and a frightened woman. Instead, he has encountered people who have found something worth dying for, who possess the dangerous courage that comes from accepting loss as preferable to surrender. "Last chance," Jeremiah calls from the darkness. Ride away now, and I'll let you live to threaten someone else. Morrison's answer comes in the form of rapid rifle fire directed at every window and opening in the cabin structure. He has chosen escalation over retreat, violence over negotiation, risking everything on the hope that superior firepower will overcome superior knowledge and motivation. The third hammer blow comes from directly behind Morrison's position. Jeremiah has left the cabin through the root cellar Catherine thought was a dead end, emerging from a concealed exit that opens into the forest beyond the cabin's immediate perimeter. He moves through snow and shadow like a vengeful spirit, hammer raised and ready to deliver justice with the same precision he once applied to shaping heated metal. Morrison spins at the sound but cannot bring his rifle around quickly enough. The hammer descends with finality that echoes off distant peaks, and Morrison crumples into snow that immediately begins turning dark with spreading stains. The last gunman, positioned near the cabin's eastern corner, fires wildly in Jeremiah's direction, but cannot locate his target in the shifting shadows cast by moonlight through pine boughs. His shots go wide, accomplishing nothing except revealing his position to a man who has spent 9 years learning every stone and tree in this terrain. Catherine maintains her position with knife ready, waiting for resolution that seems inevitable but not yet complete. Around her, the mountain holds its breath, while two men who understand violence pursue each other through snow-covered ground with deadly intent. The silence stretches until it snaps like overstressed cable. The fourth hammer blow ends the last gunman's participation with finality that leaves only mountain wind and distant owl calls to fill the night air. Jeremiah emerges from the forest like a figure carved from shadow and moonlight, hammer hanging loose at his side, his face showing the grim satisfaction of completed work. "It's finished," he says simply. Catherine lowers the knife from her throat and takes her first full breath in what feels like hours. "Are you hurt?" "Scratched but not shot. You?" "Frightened but functional." Jeremiah surveys the clearing where 4 bodies mark the end of Morrison's operation. "We'll have to bury them before the ground freezes completely. Can't leave evidence scattered around for spring thaw to reveal." The practical concern strikes Catherine as somehow typical of this man who approaches even violence with careful attention to consequences and cleanup. But she has more immediate worries than disposal of corpses. "The legal papers Morrison mentioned, do you think they were real? Real enough to cause problems if the wrong people start asking questions." Jeremiah walks to Morrison's body and searches through the dead man's coat pockets. But paperwork only matters if someone's alive to enforce it. He produces a leather folder containing documents that look official even by moonlight. Property deeds, debt assignments, territorial court stamps that suggest legitimate legal proceedings. But as he examines them more closely, Jeremiah's expression shifts from concern to something approaching amusement. What is it? These papers are real, all right, but they're not what Morrison claimed. Jeremiah holds up the documents so Catherine can see them in the moonlight. "This is a deed transfer for property located in Eagle County, not here. Morrison was running a bluff with paperwork that covers land 50 miles south of here. The revelation transforms their situation completely. Morrison came here with forged authority, backed by legal documents that provided no actual justification for his actions. His confidence was theater, designed to demoralize resistance that might otherwise prove effective. So, we're safe here? Safer than we were an hour ago." Jeremiah folds the papers and tucks them inside his coat. "But Morrison's operation involved more people than just these 4. When he doesn't return with you and the information he wanted, others will come looking." Catherine nods, understanding that tonight's victory represents tactical success rather than strategic resolution. Morrison may be dead, but the network he represented remains intact, capable of sending additional men with clearer instructions and better preparation. "How long do we have?" "Long enough to plan our next move. Maybe long enough to finish what you started." Jeremiah approaches Catherine slowly, his movements careful and telegraphed like a man approaching spooked livestock. When he reaches her side, he gently takes the knife from her hand and returns it to its sheath. "That was the bravest thing I've ever seen anyone do," he says quietly. "Or the stupidest." Sometimes they're the same thing. Catherine looks around the clearing where 4 men died attempting to claim property that was never theirs and capture a woman who refused to be owned. The snow will cover their blood by morning, and spring will erase even those traces. But the courage displayed here tonight will persist, remembered by two people who discovered that some things matter more than survival. What happens now, she asks. Jeremiah studies her face in the moonlight, noting the way combat has transformed her from victim into survivor, from passenger into participant in her own destiny. This woman who came to his mountain as damaged goods has revealed herself as someone worth fighting beside, someone whose presence makes exile feel like homecoming. Now we go inside and tend our wounds, he said. Tomorrow we figure out how to retrieve the evidence you hid and make sure Morrison's death accomplishes something worthwhile. They walk toward the cabin together, boots crunching through snow that sparkles like scattered diamonds under starlight. Behind them, the mountain wind begins the work of covering tracks and erasing evidence of violence that disrupted its ancient peace. Inside, the cabin bears scars from sustained gunfire, but remains structurally sound. Broken glass crunches underfoot as they assess damage and begin the process of making their sanctuary habitable again. Jeremiah boards up shattered windows while Catherine sweeps debris from floors that will need careful cleaning before normal life can resume. Jeremiah, she says as they work side by side in companionable silence. Yes? Earlier tonight, when you thought we might die, you said my presence here had meant something. He pauses in his hammering to look at her directly. It did. It does. I felt the same way. For the first time since leaving the convent, I felt like I belonged somewhere. The words carry weight beyond their literal meaning, confession wrapped in acknowledgement of connection that transcends circumstance. They work together now, not as strangers bound by transaction, but as partners who have chosen to stand together against forces that would separate them. Catherine, Jeremiah says as he drives the last nail into a makeshift window covering. Yes? When this is over, when Morrison's network is exposed and the evidence reaches proper authorities, you'll be free to go wherever you choose. She sets down her broom and turns to face him fully. Where would I go? Anywhere. Back east to family, west to new territories, south to warmer climates. The world's full of possibilities for someone with your courage and intelligence. Catherine moves closer until she can see her reflection in his storm-colored eyes. What if the place I choose is here? The question hangs between them like smoke from dying fires. Jeremiah searches her face for signs of obligation or gratitude masquerading as affection, but finds only honest assessment and genuine choice. This isn't much of a life, he says carefully. Isolation, hard work, dangers you can't imagine yet. It's a life where I matter, where what I think and feel and choose has consequence, where someone values my presence enough to fight for it. She reaches up to touch the scar that crosses his left cheekbone, her fingertips tracing damage that speaks of years spent learning to survive in unforgiving territory. And it's a life with someone who understands that broken things can still be useful, still be beautiful, still be worthy of care. Jeremiah covers her hand with his, trapping her touch against his face as if afraid she might withdraw it. I don't know how to be what you deserve. You don't have to know. We'll figure it out together. The promise settles between them like foundation stones, solid and permanent despite the uncertainties that surround their immediate future. Outside, winter wind continues its eternal conversation with pine boughs and stone walls. Inside, two people who have learned to trust each other begin planning for tomorrows that might actually be worth living. There's something else, Catherine says as they prepare to attempt sleep in a cabin marked by violence but sanctified by courage. What's that? My real name isn't Catherine O'Malley. Jeremiah raises an eyebrow. What is it? Catherine Rose Sullivan. I took the O'Malley name when I joined the convent, honoring the abbess who sponsored my vocation. But if we're going to build something real together, I want you to know who I really am. Catherine Rose Sullivan, Jeremiah repeats, testing the syllables like a prayer or promise. It suits you better than sister anything. They retire to their separate rooms but leave doors open, allowing conversation to continue across the cabin's interior as they process the night's events and plan for challenges yet to come. The easy intimacy of shared space and common purpose makes formal courtship seem unnecessary, even artificial. They have already seen each other at moments of greatest vulnerability. They have already chosen to trust and protect and value each other above personal safety. What remains is simply the daily work of building lives worth sharing, of creating space where two wounded hearts can heal in proximity without causing additional damage. Dawn comes to Copper Ridge like a blessing, golden light streaming through boarded windows to reveal damage that can be repaired and lives that can be rebuilt. Catherine wakes to the sound of coffee percolating and wood being split for the morning fire. Domestic sounds that speak of routine restored and normalcy reclaimed. But outside, four graves mark the price of freedom and the cost of standing against forces that mistake cruelty for strength. The mountain remembers everything, including the courage of two people who refused to be owned, or intimidated, or separated by threats that would have broken lesser spirits. As Catherine Rose Sullivan prepares to face whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, she knows with certainty that she has found something worth fighting for. Not just safety or shelter or protection from immediate threats, but partnership with someone who sees her clearly and values what he sees. The evidence hidden in Denver awaits retrieval. Morrison's network requires exposure to proper authorities. Legal complications and practical dangers stretch ahead like mountain trails that disappear into cloud and uncertainty. But here on Copper Ridge, in a cabin scarred by violence but strengthened by shared courage, two hearts that have learned to beat in rhythm prepare for whatever storms the future might bring. Some things Catherine reflects as she watches Jeremiah tend his forge with the same patient precision he applies to all worthwhile tasks, are indeed worth dying for. More importantly, they are worth living for. The mountain wind carries her laughter toward distant peaks, where it echoes like music in the clean morning air.